Europe is a big user of digital technology, but it relies heavily on the US and China for its digital infrastructure. That's a critical issue on the minds of German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and French President Emmanuel Macron as they co-host a summit on Europe's digital sovereignty here in Berlin today. Their goal is to make the continent, quote, digitally independent, to lower the risk of cyber attacks and to boost the homegrown tech industry.
Only 4 of the world's 50 largest tech companies come from Europe. The EU is falling further and further behind in the digital economy across many different tech subsectors, like network and other digital infrastructure, chip production, artificial intelligence, software and cloud platforms, and in cybersecurity. 80% of all digital technologies employed in the EU are imported, mainly from the US and China. This has serious implications for the security of European companies. If China stops supplying chips, for example, factories in Europe will come to a standstill. The US dominates software and AI. In the event of a political dispute, this would lead to considerable problems. That's why Europe must become digitally independent, warn business associations. They want targeted promotion of the tech industry, a common European digital infrastructure, and less regulation and bureaucracy. The goal is for Europe to become not only a user, but also a designer of digital technologies.
And someone who knows a lot more about the tech industry is with me in the studio, Stephen Beardsley from DW Business.
Thank you.
Stephen, France and Germany are spearheading the push for more technological sovereignty. Are they a bit late to the party?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say it's better late than never, right? But there is a lot to be worried about, and that is the fact that there are a lot of dependencies when it comes to Europe. And those dependencies in this area, when we talk about digital technology, they exist from infrastructure all the way to software. So on the infrastructure side, we could look at telecom components. Huawei comes to mind, right? That's a Chinese company that's backed by the state. Or what could come to mind when we look at software is cloud computing. So think of the big companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, right? So the US and China, that's where Europe is caught between. And that's important for 2 reasons. One is that those companies and technically those governments then have some sort of leverage, in theory, over Europe if there are sort of political disputes. And as you can see in a time like this where tensions are growing, that's not that difficult to imagine as maybe it once was 5-10 years ago. On the other side, we know that these applications that are dependent on all of this infrastructure and software, they're only growing. AI, quantum computing, and that if Europe wants to have a share of that prosperity, it needs to get its act together.
We've been discussing these issues years ago.
For a while, yeah.
Now, where are the biggest problems for Europe to catch up?
Well, one of the biggest is money, right? And I think this is something that we talk about a lot. And when I talk about money and spending, I don't mean government spending, but I mean private spending. Companies, what are companies investing? And if we take AI, for example, a very recent example, we see the differences, the gulfs in what the US is doing in terms of private investment and what Europe is doing in terms of private investment. According to Stanford University, between 2013 and 2024, the US saw almost 5 times, more than 5 times actually, as much private investment in AI than Europe did. And that's not really even counting this current AI investment boom that we're seeing in the US right now. Now, that's part of a larger problem in Europe, which is that this is a union of member state economies, and it's more set up to regulate tech than to really encourage its development. I mean, look at the fact that you have 27 different capital markets, right? So investment doesn't flow so easily from, say, Spain to Latvia as it would from Atlanta to Denver in the US. You also have competition regulators here that might clip the wings of any company that starts to grow too much and sort of threaten competitors in other nations. And then on top of that, you have an immense amount of bureaucracy, and you have some other problems in terms of just finding a foothold to grow, to scale up. And then on top of that, even if you say, okay, like we're doing right now, you have 2 nations that want to work together and take steps in the right direction, do they agree on what those steps are? France and Germany have agreed in the past that they want to work together to create digital sovereignty and specifically cloud computing. They worked together in 2019, 2020 to create the Gaia X program. That was a system of infrastructure and protocols on which other companies could build cloud infrastructure. The problem is it never really took off. And what we've seen is the market for cloud computing has only grown, but the European share of it has not.
So political support can do only so much. Now, let's paint a worst-case scenario here. What's the worst that could happen?
The worst-case scenario is the one that anyone can imagine. What happens when a bunch of servers with Amazon's cloud service goes out? Then we see that a lot of websites in Europe fall apart, not just in the US. So what happens if, in theory, someone were to purposefully turn those servers off as part of a trade disagreement, something like that? That's what's on everyone's minds right now. And that's what we're seeing from surveys as well in Germany and other nations, is that companies have this fear as well. So maybe that's the bright side, is that there is more urgency now to get this done. And something that can happen that didn't happen in the past can actually take place. Finally, again, this goes back to prosperity as well. Can Europe take share in the prosperity of a growing technological sector? It's incredibly important as we see AI develop, quantum computing, robotics, all of this.
Are you hopeful?
I'm optimistic.
Very good. Stephen Beardsley there from DW Business. Thank you, Stephen.
And I'm joined here in the studio now by Frederike Kaltheuner. She has written extensively on digital technology. She's also an independent advisor on the intersection of geopolitics and high tech. Frederike, it's good to have you in the studio.
Thanks for having me.
So I have to ask you, has Europe basically been sleeping at the wheel when it comes to digital technology innovation?
The fact that the summit happened at all is actually quite astonishing. There's been so much pressure from the US in advance. And for me, this summit communicates that Europe wants to reclaim its agency over the future of technology. And that's really urgent and important if you look what our technological presence currently looks like. So AI slop has made the internet unusable. Elon Musk, someone who has openly campaigned for the far-right AfD to win Germany's election, he's running one of the major social media networks. And when it comes to AI, the very same companies that have dominated the platform age are now dominating AI. But this time it's not just about your email or your search. This time AI wants to be integrated into healthcare, your therapist, your teacher. So the stakes are really high.
Well, all of these companies that you're mentioning, all these segments, they're all American companies, basically. When we hear the German Chancellor saying that Europe must not cede the digital sphere to the US and China, I mean, you know, that's nice of the Chancellor to say, but isn't it a little too late?
We've been talking about sovereignty since the Snowden revelation, so we really have failed to take action. This time around, though, we're talking about sovereignty in the midst of an unprecedented AI hype. So the question for Europe is not just, we don't just want European AI, we want better AI, and we also maybe don't want to use AI at all in certain circumstances.
Yeah, but how do you get better AI? I mean, I find it telling that we're talking about the political leaders of two countries here in Europe chairing this meeting, but the political world is not where the innovation is going to come from, right? I mean, we see that in the US. These are venture capitalists who are funding startups. You have an entire environment made for people to act on their fantasies. Do you have that here in Europe?
It's really interesting that you mentioned this. There's actually been a disagreement between Macron and Merz during the summit. So Merz kept saying that markets in the US are entirely unregulated, that there are no subsidies, that there isn't any government support. That is simply not true when it comes to AI.
He used to work at BlackRock. He should know better, right?
Yes, he should know better. Trump said very explicitly that fostering the American AI industry is a matter of national security. So there's a lot of subsidies in the US. Whereas Macron actually made the really important and insightful point that do we really want the US model in Europe? Is that the kind of economy that we should aspire to? An economy that only grew because 5 tech companies spent unprecedented amounts on a speculative race to invest in AI infrastructure.
But do you, if there is an American model or a Chinese model, do you see a European model emerging? I mean, people say the Europeans are very good when it comes to writing the rule book for the digital world, but creating digital innovative companies, that happens in the US.
And there are reasons why that is the case. So one reason, not the only one, but one reason is that the digital market, including in AI, is heavily concentrated. And it was quite encouraging to hear market concentration as a central theme throughout the summit today. So that's good. However, at the same time, there's a real risk that we are playing innovation against regulation. That's a misunderstanding. Bureaucracy is bad, but setting the rules that shape what kind of digital future, what kind of AI we want, is not.
You don't think there's too much regulation already in the European Union that's holding back innovation?
Look, there's a lot of bureaucracy, but what we're talking about is delaying the rules for high-risk AI by 1 year. So what is high-risk AI? That would, for example, be the use of AI in a medical context. That is the use of AI by the public sector to make important decisions about people's lives. I don't think this is where we should compromise. We should cut down on bureaucracy, but we should not give up the power to really shape what this market looks like.
We talk about the race for digital supremacy. But how is that going to impact the everyday European? I mean, in his or her daily lives, how are they going to notice the fact that Europe is losing the race?
Well, so the dependency that Europe has is causes systemic risks, right? Even today, there was a CrowdStrike outage. Lots of websites depend on it. And in practice, that means that services are not available. So this dependency is a security threat. But I think really going back to this, what kind of future do we actually want? The question is is it good for Europeans if we have a European version of Twitter on which far-right content thrives? That's not the kind of future we want. Do we want European AI slop to flood the internet? No, that's not what we want. I think Europe wants to grow its economy. Europe wants high-quality jobs. And sometimes AI is the answer, but in many cases, it really isn't. And I think that's the most important issue at the moment.
Friedrich, it's good to have you here in the studio. We appreciate you coming by. It's a fascinating topic, and we'll see what happens next. Thank you.